Hello, everyone. How are you all doing today? I'm really excited about today's webinar and the discussion that we're about to begin because we are moving into a realm of greater capacity for action. And I'm very excited about this. I'm looking forward to seeing what we create together and feeling really good about the webinar today. So really glad you're all here. Would love to, aside from saying hi in the chat box, which is lovely, if maybe say a little bit about how you're feeling today. I see Marco is happy to be here. Who else is ready and excited about the webinar? How are you feeling? What's going through you right now? Let's get a sense of it. See, Gail is ready and excited. I love this. It's wonderful. And PJ, dude, we're always excited, aren't we? Yes, we are. Here we go. Meaty, I'm also feeling the love of life. I'm ready for it. Anita, I'm very glad to hear you're in a healing place. We feel that way here in Body Chara, like we're in a healing place. Kathy is feeling very awake with nature all around. Lovely. Thank you for these little self-reports. Helps us get a sense that, that we're all here together, even though at the moment we're just seeing me. And it gives us a moment for others to join us. Jonathan, I'm also very enthusiastic about what we're going to be doing today, because today we will begin to design together how we can collaborate in creating projects. Or those of us who have projects, how can we improve those projects? And this is something that I feel is just so timely for us in the midst of a planetary scale crisis, with the challenges and the predicaments that we're in continuing to intensify, and they will for quite some time. So we're in the thick of it, and we will be for years, and in some parts for decades. So how can we create projects together? How can we create capacities together to do what we can't do on our own? And so I'm really excited about this. Really looking forward to it. And I think maybe we should just jump right in and get started, and then let those who arrive a little late join us. Standard housekeeping, I'll be giving a presentation for about 20 minutes, and then we'll have some discussion around it. And we will follow this with our community Zoom calls in the next 2 days. And then we'll build on this in the coming weeks, continuing to scaffold our learning journey as we go. And here we are at week 5, the beginning of the second month. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started and jump right in, shall we? So here we go. Today, what I want to talk to all of you about is how we can begin playing in the sandbox of regenerative finance. Not just talking about what it is philosophically, or looking at case studies or real life examples that other people are doing, but how can we do this ourselves? How can we get our own fingers in the clay and build some things and see how well they stand? Have some fun, be creative together, pull out our toys and share them with each other. This is something that we can find deep meaning and purpose in doing by doing it together. And so here on this learning journey, we said from the very beginning, the purpose of this was to create projects and to have real world impacts, not only to talk about regenerative finance, but to do it. And so today we begin in a formal way as a group, this process that I know some of us have already been exploring and dabbling in for months or even years, but together as of now, we're going to begin doing it in groups in this learning journey. So here is basically our agenda for today. We're going to really focus on learning by doing. We're not just going to talk about things and abstractly apply them to contexts that are unfamiliar to us, the way so much of education is in the formal education world. No, what we're going to do now is take 2 parallel activities and then weave them with each other to reinforce each other, which is that we're going to participate in a live case study that I'll be telling you more about in this webinar. And we will create a regenerative project incubator and accelerator, which in some ways we've already laid the groundwork for. And so we're going to be seeing what both of these things are, how the details of how they work will be created together by all of us on the learning journey, and we're ready to begin this stage of the work. So here's something I want to really stress. Doesn't matter how much formal education we have, how many books we've read, how smart we are, none of us will really know how to do this without getting our hands dirty. We need to try things, we need to make mistakes and mess up and learn from what we failed at. We have to go through flurries of emotions as we get excited, we're let down, we're disappointed, we're anxious because we don't know how it's going to go, we're excited to see what happens next. These flurries of emotions that can drive us forward or can hold us back. And we're going to do this work in real world settings. This is the only way to really learn. In the last 4 weeks, we've been preparing to begin this kind of project work together. So just as a reminder of what's happened in the last month, the first week we focused on planting the seeds of community. We talked about what our purpose was together, what it means to engage in regenerative finance and regenerative economics, and we started getting to know each other. And we said we'll focus on social dynamics to practice seeing how regenerative economics works in our own groups. And that led us to the second week, where we looked at pro-social as a type of regenerative finance, that the flow of value within a group of people who are cooperating and trusting and generously supporting each other has all of the felt experiences and the dynamic principles of regenerative finance, which enabled us to then start to create structure around the multiple kinds of value, the multiple kinds of capital that are created or that exist, and how they can flow like the flow of energy and nutrients in an ecosystem. So we could see these ecological flows, which is what we talked about in the third week. And this then prepared us to use these conceptual tools and these shared experiences and the conversations we've had in our community calls to apply all of this to a real world example, which is what we looked at last week with pro-social land negotiations as we went through all of the difficulties setting up a nature reserve in Colombia using crowdfunding money to do it. So all of this was like preparation. Having gone through these 4 weeks of activities, we're now in a place where we can start to take all that we've been learning, our shared language, our shared experience, and begin to apply it to projects together. What's really beautiful about this is we have a lot of structural support that we can make use of. For one thing, we have the Earth Regenerators platform with more than 2,700 members, and we need to start thinking now, as we go through the next month of this learning journey, how do we reach out and expand beyond this small cohort of people who are in this learning journey? And how do we engage the much larger community of Earth Regenerators on the platform of Mighty Networks? And also the millions of people in the world who may not be on this platform, but want to participate in the regeneration of Earth. We also have this course section of the platform for the learning journey, which has enabled us to engage in community calls, to have these weekly webinars, to self-organize into groups. Initially, community Zoom group A and B, but now we're going to move into groups around projects. It allows us to have these topics sections, like the offers and needs marketplace and the regenerative project section, and support materials and reference materials that allow us to start learning together and sharing resources with each other. So we've had all of this capacity that we've been using a little bit off and on throughout the last month, and that we can leverage and use a lot more for what we're going to do next. Because now we're going to begin a project incubator where we're going to take the projects that many of you already have, or you can get together in a group around a shared interest or a shared concern and create a project. And in this project incubator, what we want to do is provide a support ecosystem where you can host your own project, or you can also join other projects. You could do both, actually. You can host your own project and join other projects. And you can give feedback to other people about their projects or to the projects that are evolving collaboratively. And in this way, we can design together how these projects improve and how they roll out into the world. And this is what we want to do using the community calls, using the topic section of the Learning Journey course, using self-organized groups, and from now on, these weekly webinars. So that during the rest of this learning journey, this becomes a support ecosystem for the collaborative design of projects that each of you can host or can join or create together. This is one of the elements of what this learning journey has been about from the very beginning. And that leads to what we're calling the Regenerative Project Incubator and Accelerator. I know that's a really long name, but the point here is that in some cases, the projects don't exist yet, and we need to incubate them until they can be born. Others already exist, but they're not going very quickly. They're not progressing very much, and we want to strengthen them. We want to accelerate them. We want to help them to be fortified and better supported and more resilient to go out into the world and make an impact. And this is the idea of a project incubator and accelerator. We already have started this in the Regenerative Projects topic section of the Learning Journey course. So if you go to the Learning Journey course on Mighty Networks, and then go to the left-hand bar to topics, you'll see a topic for regenerative projects. And if you click on that, you'll come to this page. This was a post by PJ, where he set up a spreadsheet for people to list projects and share their ideas. And there are already quite a few projects listed here. Several of you have posted them already. So this is an area where this sort of brainstorming and idea mapping and assessing of interest, like, oh, that project, I'm interested in that one. This one, not so much. This one, I should talk to the person who posted it because I think I'm curious to know more and I might want to get involved. These are all elements of just having the course section and having the spreadsheet. So this has been some preparatory work for the work we're going to do now. The question for us that will be a topic for this week's Zoom calls is, how do we organize ourselves for this forum? How do we organize ourselves into these incubators and accelerators of regenerative projects? How do each of you find your way into a project? Or if you have a project, how do you recruit people to join it? And this is something that we don't want to prescribe as though we know how to do it. This can be a topic of discussion on the Zoom calls this week, so that together you can help design that process and we can engage in collective learning and collective intelligence to help us do this better. So for the discussion today and for the Zoom calls, just start thinking to yourself, how do we organize ourselves pro-socially for this forum that can incubate and accelerate regenerative projects? Are you excited about this? I'm excited about it. I'm really looking forward to seeing what we come up with. All right, that's the Regenerative Project Incubator and Accelerator. The other way we're going to learn by doing is, if you don't have a project, or you're not really sure how to start a project, or maybe you just want to tag along in someone else's bigger, more complex project because you're going to learn so much by being involved in it, then we can invite you, all of you, even those who have your own projects, to participate in a live case study. What this means is we're not going to read a case study, we're going to live it. And then we're going to document it as we go. And as we document this live case study, we're all going to learn how to do this by doing it together. For those of you who are in the work group for the Barichara Regeneration Fund, you'll know what I'm talking about. In that work group between December and March, we documented, I was writing progress reports. I think I've written 17 of them now, where every 1 to 2 weeks, we would write a progress report that collectively becomes a case study. But in the work group, every week on Thursdays, we had a meeting and we fundraised, we created a shared equity investment model, we successfully bought land, and we began a project. And all of this enabled the learning journey we're now on to emerge as well, that came out of that work group. In the same way, we're going to start a new regenerative finance project right now. I'm about to share it with you. That will be a live case study. a living experience of collaboration that we will document as we go. Are you curious? Are you ready to get started? Well, let's see what it is. Okay, look at this beautiful landscape. This is part of the territory around Barichara. And there's a very important project to be done in this drainage basin that runs along the edge of the cliff. There's a special piece of land, and some of you already know about it, that is called Las Albercas. Las Albercas is the Spanish word for the pools of water. That's because this land has 3 natural well springs where water came out of the ground a long time ago. And there's a natural river that ran across it that had water in it every day of the year until, according to the campesinos that we've talked to, until the mid-1970s when it went dry. And from the 45 years ago until now, this river has been dry and these well springs have not had any water in them. So this piece of land called Las Albercas used to be appropriately named, and now it's a bygone memory of the past or an aspirational dream of the future. And what's interesting is we have the possibility to buy this piece of land and set up a community regeneration project on it. Now here's what's really interesting about Las Albercas. This land has 10 hectares, so it's pretty big by itself, but it is connected to another piece of land, 6.5 hectares of land in the Bioparque that's up here at the top of the cliff, and that our family and many of our friends have been working in for the last 1.5 years. It's a community reforestation project that's been going for 12 years, and they've planted more than 5,000 trees in it already, bringing the forest back to life. And it's a community asset known throughout the territory that's very closely connected to this land, Las Albercas. Also, there's a place called Guaymaro, which is 9.5 hectares, almost 10 hectares of land owned by a Dutch couple named Joop and Julia. We're actually camping at their campsite right now, my family is, because we're not staying in a house, which allows us to visit Las Albercas regularly. And Guaymaro is a place where they're doing permaculture work, they're setting up a food forest, and for 8 years, they've been planting more than 3,500 native trees in a reforestation effort. So the Las Albercas project would join these 2 long-standing reforestation projects. But wait, there's more. Because also, oops, I went the wrong direction. Also, there's this other neighbor named Manuela who has another 7.5 hectares of land that she has just purchased a couple of years ago and is beginning to reforest. Now, what you might notice is that between these 3 pieces of land of Manuela, Guaymaro, and Las Albercas, we're actually covering a lot of the drainage basin, which means if we reforest all of this collaboratively, just with the land you visually see here, we have about 30 hectares of land that's all connected to the water that flows into this dry riverbed. So this is a place where we could try to bring a river back to life by doing reforestation across all of these pieces of land where the people are already doing the work. And of course, there's the Origen del Agua, the origin of water. The nature reserve that we set up is up at the top of the crest, at the top end of this drainage basin. And while it actually descends on the other side into the Barichara River, it's ecologically connected to this drainage basin by helping to bring clouds and rain, and also to attract the fog that brings a lot of moisture to the plants on the ground. So it's just another piece of land, another reforestation project that we actually manage through the Barichara Regeneration Fund to help us with this reforestation effort. And interestingly, there are some indigenous paths like this one that allow you to walk from the Bioparque down to Guaymaro in 10 to 15 minutes. And this is a really essential piece of the Las Albercas land that we're about to start raising money to buy, which is that Las Albercas is connected with this path, which is called the Tobares Trail. It's also connected with a set of indigenous stone paths, the Camino Real that goes to Guane, which is a nearby village, the Camino Real that goes to Cabrera, which is a different village, and the Camino Real to Villanueva, which is a third village. So this actually means there are 4 villages, those 3 plus Barichara, that are connected through this network of stone paths. And Las Albercas is a nodal point that is walking distance from all of them, even if there are no fossil fuels, even if you're going on foot or on horse. So what's interesting is this opens the possibility for Las Albercas to become a learning center, a bioregional learning center, and we have a name for it. We want to create the Barichara Ecoversity and locate it on the land of Las Albercas. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The point here is that this regenerative finance project is about bioregional design connected to the entire territory with immediate neighboring projects that allow it to have amplifying and multiplying effects. So this is a piece of land that we can negotiate a purchase of and set up a regenerative project that can have territorial consequences, not only the consequences for the 10 hectares of land itself. Pretty interesting, isn't it? And very complex. So this is a living case study, a live case study with a lot of elements and so much to learn. So what we're talking about doing here is learning by doing with this live case study by taking the following set of actions, some of which are in a sequence and some of which can happen at the same time. The first thing is we're going to engage in land negotiations, which we actually have 3 months of history. 3 months of last year, we engaged in negotiations for this land, and we didn't come to a land agreement. And we had a lot of pro-social challenges in that land negotiation with private land speculators, withholding information, refusing to be transparent, not being very trusting, and we were unable to get to a fair price because the land speculators kept trying to keep all the information secret so they could charge us more so that we wouldn't know what a fair price was. So we already have some experience in this, and we're about to re-engage in these land negotiations, where we're going to learn a lot about how to use pro-social design work in real high-stakes negotiations. Then we will seek a fair price and see if we're able to reach it. If we're able to get to a fair price, where we can explore what that means in the discussion, then we can create a regenerative finance model, shared equity investments, crowdfunding donations, strategic partnerships as investors or making in-kind contributions. We can develop and evolve a regenerative finance model for raising the money. And that would allow us, if we're successful, to raise the money to purchase this piece of land. If we get this far in the process, then we can set up a community project on Las Albercas and connect it to the neighboring projects and other projects in the territory. This includes the regenerative design of the land itself, bringing the native forest back to this land, bringing water back to this land, trying to bring the river and those well springs back to life, but also to give birth to this ecoversity, a bioregional learning center that can serve the entire territory, and because of the Earth Regenerators platform, can partner with other bioregions around the world. And in this way, over time, by partnering with the other projects and having a bioregional focus, we can try to bring an entire river back to life. This is what I would say is one of those projects of a lifetime, that while it is fairly concrete to say, we need $150,000 or whatever the fair price is. How do we create an investment model for raising that money and creating a multi-capital ecological flow of value to enable us to purchase the land and set up community projects? That's all interesting just for the land itself. But here we're talking about bioregional scale with planetary consequences because of our ability to share what we learn with other bioregions, to bring learnings from other bioregions, and to collaborate with other bioregional learning centers around the world. So that's the potential of this living case study that we're embarking on now. And I know that's a lot to take in. So the idea is for us to have a focused work group, to use some of the webinars, some of the Zoom calls, and then set up a focused workspace for this big, complex project and see what we can learn by doing it together. And I just wanted you to look at the land again, now that you can think about how there's this drainage basin going through it. When the water hits this land, it runs downhill. And you can already see there are some patches with trees in them, and there are patches with bare grass, with bare earth and ground. So this is a place with a lot of potential for ecological restoration and cultural connectivity between the pieces of land. Well, let's look at this a little bit more, a little bit larger scale, a little bit zoomed out. So this is where the Las Albercas land is. It's where this little gray box is. And if we were to draw the entire river that it's connected to, it would be all of this. So what you can see by going back is here we're just looking at the top of a catchment system, which is maybe only 200 hectares in size. Not that big. You can walk from one end to the other in about an hour. If you walked up the riverbed from where this highway is at the bottom all the way to the top, you'd be able to do it in an hour or an hour and a half. And that's because you have to scramble through all the thick bushes and you're climbing uphill. But that whole thing is connected to something that is much larger, several hundred hectares, maybe even 1,000 hectares in size, which is the entire, what would be called the microcuenca, or the tributary river that runs from the top of this drain all the way to Rio Saravita, or also called Rio Suarez, this giant river down at the bottom that eventually runs into the Magdalena River and into the Caribbean Sea. So the idea here is to bring this entire river back to life by focusing on reforestation at the top of the drainage and setting up a reforestation school and a regenerative design school for the bioregion that is located on this piece of land in Las Albercas. So you see how we're already thinking like a fractal. How do the different projects relate to each other within larger ecological connections? And how do those larger ecological connections connect to the functions of landscapes? And how do those functions of landscapes allow us to go up and down in scale, up and down in complexity to try to do this work? And this is where we're going to really learn a lot. Yeah, it's one thing to raise money and buy a piece of land, and that's very interesting in its own right. But if we can get this piece of land set up to be able to have this fractal network intelligence for the territory to connect other projects, then we're going to be doing something phenomenal. And that's really what this case study is about. So with that said, here's a view of the land from the ground. I took this picture about 3 days ago, and you can see that there's fog that has rolled in from the river below. It rose up high, and it's touching the top of the cliff. And as you look up the valley, you can see this grassy area, which is part of the Guaymaro land that they're already reforesting, and the Las Albercas land is downhill to the right. If we look to the right and look downhill from the same spot, this is what it looks like. You can see there are a lot of trees there, but if you look between the trees in the middle, you see some green open areas, this lighter yellow green. That's grassland between the trees, where we could set up a food forest, where there's actually some space for constructing a few ecologically designed buildings. And this green area between the trees is where we would put the Barichara Ecoversity. This learning center could be located here while we do the ecological restoration and reforestation work up and down the entire valley. So you're starting to get a little bit more of a realistic feel for what the land is like. This is something that is just good for us to start to visualize the complexity of this land. There's another piece to this. Here's my daughter Elise on a rock that we affectionately call the prayer rock, because I taught Elise what prayers are by sitting on it. And that's because I have a dream, and I've planted this dream in the heart of my child. That dream is I want to bring a river back to life. I want my daughter to help do it and grow up experiencing it. I want the other children of Barichara to learn how to bring a river back to life and to know it's possible so they can go out into the world and bring other rivers back to life. And when I taught Elise to sit on this rock and to pray, we prayed to the river that went away. And we told the story of this river and how it went away almost half a century ago. And we talked about what it would take to bring the river back. And Elise made her first prayer. She said, "River, I love you, and I want you to come back." And here I took a picture of her as she was saying it. So this is one of the dreams for this project, is to teach children how to bring rivers back to life. This is part of the river that went away, very close to where Elise was sitting on that rock. And this is what it usually looks like. You can tell that water used to run in it, and it doesn't anymore. But after a very heavy rain, there were some pools of water in it. And I took Elise, and we found little glimpses of the river that went away. And Elise was so insistent on taking off her clothes and splashing around in the water that I couldn't resist. I let her in. She went and splashed and played, and she got to feel the water of the river that went away, to let that river know that there are children who love it, that will come to play in it, and who will plant trees to bring it back to life. I imagine this happening over the next 15 or 20 years as Elise goes from her current age of 4 years old to being an adult, with all of the children of the community coming together and having this experience spread out across their childhoods. That's my dream for this land, that I want to plant in my daughter's heart and bring to life. So here's the idea for the rest of this learning journey, is that we have this Las Albercas case study, this project where we can try to create a large-scale, complex, regenerative finance model in the real world that we can all create together, help succeed at generating together, and come and visit, participate in, and learn in together anytime we want for the rest of our lives. While at the same time, we want to create an incubator and accelerator for the learning journey, and then later for Earth Regenerators as a whole, so that we can roll this out and make it available to the larger membership of 2,700 people and anyone else who's interested in Earth regeneration in the future. So the idea here is we want to give birth to a community of practice by being the practitioners, by practicing in both of these spaces, by hosting our own projects or joining other people's projects or coming together around a shared interest and creating a project. We will have an incubator and accelerator, but also by having this very large scale bioregional design case study using the Las Albercas land as a concrete focus where we can raise money, engage in negotiations, create an investment model, and try to get it funded, and then start to build a community project on it. That together, we can invite people into that learning journey over the coming months and coming years, while this incubator continues to run for any new project that comes along. So this is the idea for how we can learn by doing for the rest of our learning journey. If we want to think of this 2-month learning journey as phase 1 and phase 2, we can say the first month, the phase 1, was to lay the groundwork for working in pro-social teams. We got to know each other. We looked at our social dynamics. We learned about being pro-social. We learned how to see ecological flow within our relationships, and then we applied it to a real-world example. Now that makes us ready to help each other achieve things together that are impossible on our own because we work in these pro-social teams. And by practicing in this way, we can give birth to real-world projects and make real-world impacts. So we're learning by doing without wasting a minute more of our time, because it is urgent and it is critical that we figure out how to do this as quickly as possible, that we roll up our sleeves and we get to work. So let's discuss. Let's talk about this. How are we going to do this? How ready are we to begin? What are the next steps? And how do we use our support ecosystem that is nascent and emerging to help us do this? That is the topic for the rest of today's call. So let's jump in, shall we? Hello, everyone. I'm very excited to have our discussion for the rest of our time. I see we already have 2 questions here, which is wonderful. And so maybe I'll start. Let's go just jump right into questions and start having a discussion here. I'm going to invite PJ onto the screen for his question. So PJ, if you're there, jump on in. PJ's question is, how do you expect the Las Albercas land negotiation to differ from the Origen del Agua negotiation, especially with money in hand with Origen del Agua and no money in hand yet for Las Albercas? So PJ, this is a super important question because, as you know, with Origen del Agua, we bought the land from a campesino family. But with Las Albercas, we're buying the land from a wealthy land speculator who has a stack this thick of land deeds. He probably owns 1,000 or 2,000 hectares of land, and he just buys and sells them like playing Monopoly to make as much money as he can. So I'm curious what comes up for you. How does this already feel different? Because you were on the journey with the Origen del Agua. What do you see for us?
Well, it already seems like in the one case with Origen del Agua, we were able to use the money as sort of a way to bring to have the family take you guys seriously, right? On the ground of like, we are actually here to negotiate the purchase, or just to negotiate what should be done with this land, right? It not necessarily needing to be the purchase in the end, but to regenerate the land in the way that we are looking to. And in this case, it's almost like we have to find what is the money for them, for these guys that already have a lot of money. And what can we do to sort of allow the space to be created to bring them to the table in a way where it sort of dissolves the barriers and defenses and brings people together on the same page. So I guess I was just curious from your perspective, what you're already thinking about, what we might be able to do with that, because I think it's it'll be a pretty informative thing.
Yeah, what we learned during the 3 months where we were negotiating for this land, and for those who don't know the story, there's a person who owns the land. He set up something called a compra-venta, which is a promise to buy, where someone made a down payment on the land, but then was going to try and parcelize and sell the land to make money and then pay off the rest. And it turns out this land is geographically really complicated to divide into parcels. And that this is actually the third person in 3 years who tried to buy the land from the owner. And each time the down payment stayed with the owner and the compra-venta collapsed because they couldn't raise the money. And that means the owner really does want to sell the land, can't find a buyer who has enough money, and is probably tired of this land because it's pretty complicated. It's a very complex piece of land. So what we tried to do before was we tried to get them to show us the details of the compra-venta, which is how much did you agree to pay in total? How much did you agree to pay as a down payment? And what was the timeline for when this expires and you lose your down payment? And what we found was they refused to give us that information. And we stayed in the negotiation just to keep trust going, knowing we couldn't get to a fair price. And now we're trying to figure out if that compra-venta still exists or if it collapsed and we just talk with the owner directly. So what this means is our strategy needs to be to say, how much money would it take to buy this land from you? And let the owner know that we're aware this is a very complicated piece of land to sell and that we could be a good buyer for it if we can raise the money. But we need a fair price, so we need to agree on the price, and then we can move forward raising the money. And we need a window of time to try to do it. So what I see here is, this is just a kind of a psychopathic businessman, is my assessment of him. I've met him personally. He doesn't seem to care about anything but himself and making money. So we're not going to talk about the community benefits and the ecological benefits. That will just cause him to roll his eyes, look at his phone, and ignore us, which is what he did during our meeting. So we need to just show up and show that we're good business people, which is say, we know you have a complicated asset you're trying to sell. We can even use business language with them. That's fine, knowing that's not the language we want to use. And just say, how much money do you need to take this off your hands? And how much time do we have to raise it? And see if he'll just give us a straight answer. And we already have a sense of what a fair price is or a range is. If it's in that range, we say yes. We probably do a round of negotiating so he doesn't think we're idiots. Like if he says 600 million pesos and we're like, okay, maybe he'd say, right, okay, you guys. But if we say, no, we'll give you 400, which is, we're talking here, Gail, something like between around 120,000 US dollars and 300,000 US dollars, depending on, and probably between 120 and 180 is what we think is a fair price. 180,000 US dollars, something like that. But it really depends on what this person says is acceptable. And then we need to just show that we're proper business people. We're not going to waste his time. Otherwise, he won't take us seriously. And that's just because of the nature of the person we're dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the way we raise the money and all of the aspects of that part of the negotiation, I think is much more interesting for us.
Yeah.
To figure out what we can do.
Especially with the amount of time that it took to get money finally from elsewhere to Colombia. I mean, all of that sort of has to work into the timing of it all, right? In order to be able to actually, for lack of a better term, capitalize on this opportunity that is presented. So I'll be hopping on the live case study just to listen in and see how everything's going, because it's a very, very interesting situation. A lot of moving parts and a lot of great stuff to be done.
One thing we learned from the last project, where we had so many problems making international transfers, is this time I would want to include in the budget for the land to hire an international real estate lawyer who knows how to use brokerage accounts to move money in to make a land purchase. And that might cost us $500 or $1,000. And just to be sure it goes well this time, I would be very professional and just include that in the budget. Whereas last time we were working with local campesino families, we used a personal bank account of a friend to move money in. We made it up every step of the way, and it dragged out for several months.
Mm-hmm.
And we would be very clear. A guy's asking a question here about Bitcoin in the chat. There is a Bitcoin wallet that you can use to sell money into Colombian pesos, or people with Colombian pesos can buy Bitcoin. So we could go to that Bitcoin marketplace to receive money in Colombian pesos using that digital wallet in Colombia, and then move it into a Colombian bank account. So I think the cryptocurrency part of this is one of the very interesting parts. And yeah, Guy, I already looked that up, so I know that exists. So I'll look to people like you who have experience with cryptocurrencies to help us do this. But I think this is a really important part of the work. So thanks for bringing it up. And PJ, thanks for the great question. I want to jump to others and we'll talk more. So thanks a lot, and onward we go. Yeah, that question is really important and has a lot of elements to it. So I'm glad PJ asked that question. See, the next question I have is from Meaty. So Meaty, I'll invite you onto the screen. Hopefully the technology works. Meaty's question is, a question has stayed with me since listening to your Bar HR experience so far. Was there a point in your transformative dialogues when it might even have been possible to negotiate the transfer of the land without money by having the owners inspired enough by the project's future for the community to commit it to common ownership? So what's beautiful about this question, Meaty, is we asked this question. We actually offered to give money to the family, but have them keep ownership in exchange for it either being a long-term lease or that they would set up a nature reserve and accept restrictions, like they couldn't sell the land. And they were too confused by it. They didn't understand it. They didn't think we were serious, so they didn't go for it. But I'd love to hear more of what you're thinking here, because I resonate so much with what you're asking. So tell me more.
Well, you know, I think at the back of it is I sit with this notion of transformation, and it seems to me that I just have to be open to transformation myself. And if I start, I mean, it's clear from what you've already said in your response to PJ and in what you're telling me now, that you have already gone that route. But I think I just experience again and again and again, especially in this American economy and culture, that people start with the money, and it's a mystery to me, partly because of the strange being that I obviously am, that I just never think that money is the place to start. So really it's, yeah, I think you've already, in a sense, answered. But having said that, my challenge DNA is already up, wondering if there is a way that this guy who only cares about money is reachable in other ways as well. I just can't put that part of me aside, you know. It's
Yeah,
irrepressible somehow.
Yeah, I'll tell you a little story. So when we met this owner, we also met the person who had the compraventa, which was a guy named Fabian. And we met Fabian's friend, who was just this, obviously this like slimy, smarmy marketing guy, like really nice and friendly, but would probably steal your watch off of your wrist if you could get away with it. You know, just charming, but in a very superficial way. And you know, if you've been around those kinds of marketing people, you get to where you can spot them pretty quickly. What was interesting was in the negotiation, we had two additional people on our side, two Colombians who spoke Spanish better than I do. Margarita, who represents cultural trauma and the psychology of healing and has been in Barichara for like 25 years and is deeply committed to people. And also very, very strongly holds to transparency and honesty. And then a guy named Camilo, who was like the social entrepreneur, lawyer, community development guy, who kept offering different models. Like we could buy the land, or we could go into a joint venture, or we could do this, or we could do that, trying to change their thinking. And what we noticed was Fabian was like the novice. He's the one who had the compraventa, but he also was the least experienced. And he was trying to impress his marketing friend while maintaining the respect of the guy who owned land. And we watched as his heart was being changed by a conversation, but he sort of felt powerless to do anything about it. But each time we talked, I noticed him just emotionally being a little different. Whereas the marketing guy felt like your classic charming narcissist with no conscience. It had no effect on him whatsoever, but he just continued to be nice and charming while just ignoring whatever you said and trying to get what he wanted. Sort of like if you're an intelligent woman, but he's just trying to get you in bed, he just keeps going back to schmoozing you. It was very much like that, except for money. And the other guy just started looking at his phone and completely disengaged and was bored with the conversation. Like, I'm glad you guys have to deal with these do-gooders because I don't want to deal with them. And you could just tell he did not care at all. And it was so important for us to read these three people as we were engaging in the negotiation. But it was like, you know, you chip away and you see what moves. And Fabian's heart was moved, but also he couldn't change his negotiation position in the arrangement of relationships he had. So we'll see how it's different now. It's been about 7 months since we stopped that negotiation. But very interesting to observe the things the non-monetary things you're talking about were very much where our work was and where our work needs to be again. So I look forward to learning from your experiences in this as we move forward.
Well, the one thing I've learned so far is that miracles can come out of extraordinary places. And yeah, I look forward to the journey together, Joe. I'm so enjoying this. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Midi. And I'm excited to roll up our sleeves and do this together. It's going to be fun. Awesome. Thank you. I'm going to jump on to the next question and see what others we have to go through here. That's a great question there. The next one we have was actually asked by Jonathan first. So we'll jump into this first. He's asking a very simple question. I'll invite you onto the screen as well. How about asking for a ground lease? So this is a great question, Jonathan. And this is something we explored with the Origen del Agua land, where we offered to set up between a 10-year and a 30-year lease. And in Colombia, they have laws that restrict you to 30 years. So we couldn't do it for longer than that. But we explored that with the Origen del Agua land. We haven't explored that here. And I'm curious if you're able to come on the screen, if we can talk a little bit about the difference between common ownership and a land trust type of arrangement, a direct purchase or a lease. I think these ownership questions are like foundational. You've got to answer them well. So I'm really curious what you're thinking about when it comes to ground leases, which may not be realistic in this case. We need to explore that, but I'm just curious what you're thinking here.
Well, it seems to me that you have to work with the best resources and opportunities that you have. And you kind of do this by exploring all of the possibilities that could be, conceived of in this kind of a situation. Now, your evaluation of the property owner is, they're not really somebody who can be drawn into a conversation about the care of the land or necessarily their vision of the future. But rather than kind of just going with their desire to keep selling off pieces of their land and buying others cheap, if you suggest a ground lease, first of all, it would be less costly. It would be an ongoing payment. But in a sense, you can also appeal to their greed because they keep ownership of it and they are making money off it. Right now, they're not. If they sell it, maybe they'll make a profit on what they bought it for, but that's it. There's no further value for them in the transaction. So, it's looking at it from the person's perspective, but then saying, however, if what this does is gives us effectively stewardship of the land for the next 99 years or whatever it is, and what we're going to create here is something that, if you see it as something that you're willing to give back to the owner's descendants, who maybe will have a little bit different perspective on it, because, there'll be another generation on and they will have seen the example of what it is that we're doing, that, maybe you could use that as an educational, a learning moment as well. That was my thought, was that it would be less costly, it would be less challenging to get into it. It acknowledges that the ownership of the land means something, even if it doesn't mean anything to them. It means something to us that this person has custody of this property at this point, and that we're looking to transform the landscape. And if you have to buy it one piece at a time, it's kind of like maybe, it's going to take too long to get the river back.
Yeah, this is a really interesting exploration, especially the part about what changes in a person's consciousness as we do the work, which I think is a really interesting, like a secret ingredient. And one thing that makes me cautious about this approach in this case, not to say we wouldn't do it, but it makes me cautious, is our friends who have the Guaymaro land where we're camping now. They know several of the people who were previous owners of this land or were engaged in attempts to buy the land. And they noticed that without exception, every person had difficulties with this person who's the owner now. That this person basically tried to cheat them, caused them a lot of stress and anxiety, was just a really difficult person to work with. And that there were 5 different people that they know that have had this experience. And some of them were going into business together and had the experience together. And so that's just a warning sign about this approach. What's interesting is for us to practice the psychological flexibility to say, even with that, maybe we should still explore it, which I think there's great wisdom in that, even if we end up taking another route. So it's really helpful to hear an elaboration of your thinking for us to consider this as a group. Like, I'm curious what other people think. Like, how do we approach this kind of nuanced messiness in relationships is such an important part of why any of these projects are work. Yeah, is there something else you'd like to add? Please?
Yeah, hi, I'm Victoria. Somebody has in the chat, what about a lease with an option to buy? And that actually, that's a great, that would be better than just a lease, because when you get to, whoever gets involved with investing money into the center would want to know that it's good for a longer time than whatever the balance of the years are. And if you have a lease to buy, with an option to buy, the price is fixed and doesn't inflate all those years, for the next, if you don't get a price now, by the time you wanted to buy it, it's going to be a lot more expensive. So
Yeah, I actually like this a lot. And one reason I like it is it opens the possibility to demonstrate to those who are investing in the project to help us raise the money to buy the land over time. Like we might do something really cool in the next 3 years, but it takes us 3 years to raise the money. So that's sort of a blended potential is, I think, to me, that's more interesting than a long-term lease by itself. Because otherwise we basically build up a lot of value in something that we will eventually, or will sort of hold the risk of losing the whole time.
right.
We can't pay the lease if we never raise the money. To get to the point where the contract ends. Yeah.
It will be hard to get larger investors to a structure, building a structure on the land for the institute, for the university, Ecoversity, if you don't have access to that. So yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, but thanks for that question.
Option to buy. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it creates very interesting flexibility. So thank you both for elaborating and expounding on this.
And whoever else, Gail mentioned the lease with an option to buy.
Yeah, rockstar Gail. Thank you, Gail. And thank you both. It's lovely to meet and speak with you both.
Right.
I look forward to more.
Likewise.
Awesome. Onward we go. And I see Catalina has a really interesting question in the chat that we can also start to think about, having to do with the ego or the prestige of this person, which if everyone will read that comment, I think that's a really interesting one. And I would love to float into that question after we jump into Gail's question and invite Gail the opportunity to speak. Because Gail has a question here, which is how will we organize people with projects, especially since there are more than 20 projects listed on the spreadsheet? So thank you, Gail, for allocating a little bit of time to the other side of this conversation around the incubator.
I should tell you, I'm a landlord. My husband and I have 2 houses that we rent. They're the homes we inherited from our parents. So we know a bit about that and about things like lease with an option to buy. Not that any of our tenants are going to do that, but I know that it exists. And I thought, I agree with you. You know, if you just are renting and then he could just take it all away, you're not going to be able to build Ecoversity or anything like that. But if it's agreed that and people do it with cars too, when they lease a car, that you know that you'll be able to put the money that you pay for rent towards the buying and have the time to raise the money, that could be the ideal situation there. But yeah, that's not my. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, thank you for that context in the question and what it prompted in Victoria to bring it up in the discussion. Yeah. I want to move to your other question now, which is how do we support this for the 20 other projects? And if we do this right, and a rolling portfolio of projects that could grow to any manageable size. I think the answer initially is that we want to prototype a human capacity, which is we want to prototype the capacity for those of us in this learning journey to either to be a participant in at least one project. So Gail, you might have a project or you might not. If you have a project, you'd like to recruit someone to it. If not, you'd like to find another project. So if there are 20 projects listed, we may not work with all of them, but if each person who's actively engaged in this learning journey is able to participate in at least one project, which could be their own, then we're prototyping how to do that. And to me, that feels like a good threshold level from a practical point of view in the next few weeks. Because what I'm aspiring to here, and we'll see if it's realistic, is that we basically use the next month to create a management framework or a collaboration framework where each person who's involved can participate in at least one project. So that we've sort of systematized a little bit what would a support system look like for people who have projects. And then we could roll that out slowly to the larger network. And we may not support all 20 of the projects listed in the spreadsheet, or we might if there's a lot of engagement. It really depends on how many people are engaged. And I think that's just something when we get into the community calls tomorrow and Wednesday, that in smaller groups we can discuss who has projects, what does it mean to participate in a project, how much bandwidth do each of us have to participate in these projects? Like, are some people just lurking here because they're learning, but they don't have capacity? And that's okay. But then this incubator, we want a prototype for those who are engaged to be able to participate in at least one project per person, which could be 5 people on one project. That's 5 of the people, but that each person participates in at least one. And that's my sense of it, but I'm curious what that provokes in you, having heard me say it.
Well, I asked it in kind of in response to what PJ wrote, which is, he's right. Everyone has listed projects, including me. I listed one, but nobody said what kind of help they're looking for. So like for me, it just came up the other day. I was talking to Laura Kim and another person that all we really want is an advisory council. There's some people who are willing to give kind of wisdom like we're doing now, ideas, incubating ideas. And then if they want to jump in and do some action, that'd be great too. But just having people to bounce ideas off of. So that wouldn't take a lot of time from someone. But maybe we need to add a column to that spreadsheet where people talk about what they'd be looking for, because someone else might want something that could take hours and hours and people may not have the capacity for that, or at least it gets people thinking about how they want help with their projects. Because in Group A last week, we did start doing this. When we broke up into the small groups, people were supposed to talk about their projects. And what we spent most of the time doing is just describing what our projects are about. But we didn't get into any kind of nitty gritty of what kind of help we want or anything like that. So I think this week should be careful to maybe make it a little more concrete like that. Not just what is your project, but what kind of help are you looking for or something like that. And then maybe it could also be open to the bigger group. Once the class is over, there might be other people who are not in the class who might want to help. And that way you might get more interest as well.
Yeah, I'm starting to think of something like, and PJ had mentioned this, so I'm giving a hat tip to PJ here. Here you go, PJ, your little hat tip, is to turn the idea of a pitch deck on its head. Normally a pitch deck is you're pitching to a funder, like there's a VC, a venture capitalist. You're like, here's my awesome idea, give me money to start it. And here we go the other direction. You might create a 5-minute video and post it to this incubator place, wherever it is. A 5-minute video, here's a little about my project. You can see my face, I'm talking about it for a few minutes. And if you're interested in more, I'll be hosting a session. And those who are interested, contact me and we'll find a time. So maybe 5 people come back and say, I'd be interested, and we all have time at 3 o'clock on Saturday, and you just do a Zoom call. And so the idea is that this forum would just facilitate simple best practices. So your pitch video might be a best practice. Scheduling the time for the call instead of setting the time for the call might be a best practice. And we figure out what those are, and then just offer them like a little blueprint. Here is a way that we found that works. You don't have to do this, but this is what people have found works. If you have a project to propose, you could do this too. And it might be something like that could become a facilitated forum for these projects. That's the sort of thing that seems could be really useful.
That actually sounds fun too. It would be fun to do a little video like that. I like that idea. Yeah,
and then what happens is you make friends with people who care about the same things.
Right.
And so you're forming groups around affinity. So it means you're likely to like each other for that reason. So there are all kinds of interesting parts to it. But I think this is very much what we should talk about in the Zoom calls this week, is how to structure and do this, how to support each other's projects, and how to set up a process or protocol that it's understandable and fairly easy and better yet fun to do. So Gail, I see we're getting over the time, so I just want to honor that. But thank you, and looking forward to more.
Thank you.
Awesome, thank you, Gail. And let's see, we just had one question left, and PJ was asking it, but I know we're getting over time. So I'm just gonna, PJ, if it's okay, it's gonna answer quickly. His question is, what do people who have project ideas want specifically from this incubator or accelerator? What are the ideas they have for projects? Why are the projects that are going not farther along? anything coming to people's heads right now as to what exact help is needed. So PJ asked this question to everyone. I actually think, PJ, this is a great question to ask in the Zoom call. So we could think about this question. What do people want from an incubator and accelerator? This is our chance to design our own incubator so that we can, just like Gail was doing in her question. And I think if we do this well, we'll create something that's useful to us, and we are like good test subjects for what other people would need, because we're similar to other people in the network. So if we all think of this as we're creating something that helps our own projects, but at the same time can help people like us in our place with their projects, then we can make this available to the larger network. And that would be a beautiful thing to create. So this is really great that we were able to spend a little time talking about the accelerator and a little time about the live case study, just as like teasers. And what I'm gonna do this week is when I post this web video to the course group, I'll actually invite a discussion around the live case study so we can start organizing it. And in the Zoom calls, we can focus on reactions to the case study and the incubator. And I think it's better to focus more on the incubator for helping us get our own projects going. And then we can find the right balance between these two elements of our learning, and we see where we go from here. So with that said, I know we're a little over time, so I want to be respectful of time and just say thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to see what we can do together. I'm ready to roll up my sleeves and get to work. And let's see what happens in these Zoom calls. This is going to be great. So thank you all, and see you soon.